so let's lay low too.
Privyet, my tovarshi. Thank you for joining me. My name's Comrade Vadim, and you're watching Ranking Every Assassin's Marksmanship. Today we'll be looking at the assassination of one of the most famous, or infamous, white supremacists in the United States and founder of the American Nazi Party, George Lincoln Rockwell. We'll be looking into the background, motives, and all the gory details on how and why John Patsalos assassinated Rockwell. And you're going to want to stick around to the end when we go recreate this shot and judge how good of a marksman Patsalos really was. George Lincoln Rockwell was born March 9, 1918 in Bloomington, Illinois. He was the eldest of 3 children, and from birth he would carry his father's name, but not his approval. His father, George Lovejoy Rockwell, a performer known for a sharp tongue, belittled his son every opportunity he had. Friends of the family could not recall a single instance of affection that he showed towards his son. On top of this troubling relationship with his father, when Rockwell was just 6 years old, his parents divorced. His mother moved to Atlantic City, New Jersey, while his father moved off to Maine. Rockwell was shuttled between the two, enduring beatings from his aunt while at his mother's house, and neglect while at his father's. Struggling academically, possibly because of his home life, Rockwell dropped out of high school, only to re-enroll in high school, hoping to prove himself worthy of college. But in reality, he was probably just trying to prove himself worthy of his father's pride. He graduated, then in a desperate bid to improve his grades, he repeated his senior year and graduated again. His goal was to get into Harvard, but in a cruel twist of fate, he forgot to send in his transcripts, and he was obviously rejected. The good news for Rockwell, though, is he did end up going to college, just not Harvard. The bad news doesn't end there, though, because this would prove to be another dead end for Rockwell. Halfway through his sophomore year, he wrote a paper regarding crime and delinquency, which put him right on the edge of expulsion. You have to wonder what he wrote in that paper, but I'm betting we'll be able to infer what was written with some additional details we'll learn later in this video. Now, in 1940, with war right on the horizon, Rockwell joined the United States Navy and served as an intelligence and reconnaissance pilot. Though he never saw combat, he served throughout the entirety of World War II and was eventually recalled for the Korean War. During the Korean War, he served in many roles, such as being a flight instructor at a naval air station and learning to fly the F-8 Bearcat in Iceland, after which he returned to inactive duty in 1954. Up to this point, Rockwell seems like a good American, patriotic man, but something underneath the surface was shifting. During the Korean War, he was introduced to the writings of Adolf Hitler. He described this moment as finding a part of himself, and this served as a turning point to a downward spiral that he would never return from. After struggling through a series of failed jobs after the war, he immersed himself into his newfound ideology. This included founding multiple organizations, each one more radical than the last. The National Committee to Free America from Jewish Domination, the National States' Rights Party of Georgia, the World Union of Free Enterprise National Socialists, and finally, in 1959, the American Nazi Party. By this point, his beliefs were public. His family had disowned him and moved abroad, and law enforcement was watching his every move. Rockwell and his party thrived on provoking people for publicity. He staged protests in Union Square, antagonized the Jewish community until fistfights would occur, hosted birthday parties for Hitler, and commended his followers for violence. One such instance being rewarding a member for punching Martin Luther King Jr. But these theatrics had their limits. Rockwell's ultimate goal was political power, but these antics ensured that the public nor his party members would take him serious as a state or national politician. Frustrated, he blamed his own party members for failing to grasp his party's ideological foundations. This disconnect led to division. The party ended up internally fracturing over whether to maintain its strict adherence to German National Socialism or to adopt a more Americanized approach. Rockwell, favoring the latter, rebranded his movement to the National Socialists' White People Party and distanced itself from Hitler's imagery. Surprisingly, many of the party members rejected this shift. His deputy, Matthias Kohl, became a rallying figure for the traditionalists among the party. Some members defected, while others openly opposed Rockwell. The most extreme act of defiance came in June 1967 when an unknown individual, but likely someone within the party, attempted to assassinate George Rockwell. Rockwell had spent his life searching for approval, from his father, from the public, and from history itself. But now, as his movement crumbled around him, his own followers were turning against him, he found himself once again abandoned. John Patsalos was born January 6, 1938, in New York City. At first, his early childhood seemed normal. He and his younger brother George were raised in a home that, from the outside, seemed stable. But at the age of 5, his world was shattered. His parents separated, and his mother took both boys to live with their grandmother. Enraged, John's father stalked his estranged wife and, in an act of brutal violence, shot her. She died, and his father was sentenced to 10 years in prison. John and his brother were now orphaned, raised solely by their grandmother. When John was in his mid-teens, his father was released from prison. Shortly after, his grandmother passed away, leaving both boys nowhere to turn to except back to the man that killed their mother. His father was not only poor, but also abusive, landing himself back in prison multiple times for child abuse. During these periods, John and his brother were placed in youth homes, uprooting their lives again and again. By the time he reached adulthood, John longed for purpose, discipline, and belonging, something he had never had before. At the age of 19 or 20, he joined the United States Marine Corps, seeking that structure and direction that he had been denied of in his chaotic upbringing. But it would not be the Marines that gave him meaning. That would come from a completely different source. During his service, John became more vocal about his political beliefs, particularly his admiration for Nazism. His beliefs eventually led to him being honorably discharged after only 2 years of service. No longer a Marine, he now fully embraced his Nazi ideology, and with absolute devotion, he joined George Rockwell's American Nazi Party. John was no passive member either. He immersed himself into it. He even changed his last name from Patsalos to Patler, a clear attempt to have his last name mimic that of Hitler. He became one of Rockwell's top men, participating in public demonstrations, street brawls, and propaganda efforts. His dedication earned him the rank of captain, and he was appointed as an editor to the party's magazine. For nearly a decade, Patler idolized Rockwell, not just looking up to him as a leader, but as a father figure. But Rockwell, just like the father John had lost, would soon reject him. As Rockwell's vision for the party continued to evolve, Patler found himself at odds with the man he once worshipped. When Rockwell began shifting away from strict adherence to Hitlerism in favor of a more Americanized white nationalism, Patler found himself disillusioned. He spoke out against Rockwell, believing that his leader had betrayed the party's ideals. Rockwell, ever suspicious of disloyalty, accused Patler of harboring communist sympathies, what he called Bolshevik learnings. The accusations led to an internal investigation, and soon after that, Rockwell expelled him from the party. For Patler, the expulsion was more than just political exile. He had given everything, his identity, his future, his blind devotion to Rockwell's cause. Without the party, he was nothing. And as he would later write, without Rockwell, there was no future. And so, like a son cast aside by a father he had dedicated his life to pleasing, John Patler sought revenge. It's August 25th, 1967. Rockwell has a busy day of party business to attend to. However, first he has a slow day at his house and the laundromat across the street. John Patler was also at this laundromat, but this was no coincidence. Patler, now an expelled member of Rockwell's Nazi Party, was looking for revenge. The exact details of what happened next are somewhat conflicting. Some eyewitness accounts state that Patler was waiting in his car, hidden from Rockwell. As Rockwell was leaving the laundromat, Patler took aim and fired 2 shots, through his windshield no less, hitting Rockwell once in his heart and once in his head. Other reports state that Rockwell had entered his car when Patler approached the vehicle and fired 2 shots, hitting Rockwell once in the heart while the second shot missed. Either way, Rockwell collapsed and died on the spot. Patler attempted to flee, possibly on foot or by car, but was eventually arrested and brought into custody. John Patler utilized the German-made Mauser Construction 96, or the C96. The main designers of this firearm were Paul Mauser, with the help of Fidel, Frederick, and Joseph Federle. Now this pistol is very famous. Even non-gun people will recognize it, either from their history books or possibly even their favorite movies. This gun is nicknamed the broom handle in many parts of the world, and it's also called the box cannon in others. Now the C96 is loved and used by almost anybody who can get their hands on one. Obviously the Germans would have used them throughout World War I and World War II, but these guns even saw use in wars in Ireland, Spain, China, Russia, Yugoslavia, and all across the world. Sadly, I don't own a C96, or else I would love to show you some more intricate details about it, but these things are expensive on the American market and our budget's not there yet. But like and subscribe and maybe we can get there. Due to this, I won't speak too much on the details of this gun, but I would encourage you to go watch other creators who can give you a hands-on look at this thing. It is super cool. What I will tell you though is that Mauser produced this gun in a ton of different calibers, but most notably the 7.63x25mm Mauser, the 9x19mm Parabellum, that's your classic 9mm, and 45 ACP. But I couldn't find any reliable sources that tell us what John Patsalos used on the day, but I guess it doesn't matter anyway since I don't have one. Now onto the details of the shot. It was a beautiful day, August 25th, 1967. Patler was seeking revenge on the man he saw as a father figure to his political ideologies. Like I mentioned earlier, there's some conflicting reports on exactly who was where during this. But for the convenience of this video and the cool factor, we're going to assume that Patler was in the vehicle and Rockwell was on foot. John Patler would have been parked on the side of the road in front of the laundromat. Looking at this location now, which is a small barber shop and a strip mall, Patler would have been positioned about 25 feet away from Rockwell. Rockwell, who lived right across the street, and this is once again why I believe that Patler was in the car. If Rockwell lived right across the street, why would he be driving? Was said to have forgotten something and was running back home real quick. As Rockwell was leaving, Patler spotted him walking and took 2 shots. Both of these shots would have been through the windshield and were said to have hit Rockwell once in the heart and once in the head. Rockwell died immediately. Patler attempted to flee, but he was apprehended a short time later. Rockwell's death left a void, not only in the party, but in the men who followed him, none more so than John Patler. The young man who once looked up to Rockwell like a father figure had found himself as his executioner, but in doing so, he severed the only tether he had to any sense of purpose. The man he had idolized was now gone, and Patler's fate was sealed. Even in death, Rockwell's presence continued to divide. A battle over his remains ensued between his brother and his devoted followers. His brother wanted him buried in private near his old residence in Maine. His followers, though, insisted that he be treated as a political martyr and be buried in Arlington National Cemetery in full Nazi regalia. A compromise of sorts was reached. Rockwell would be buried in Culpeper National Cemetery in his Nazi uniform. However, no attendees of the funeral could be wearing their Nazi uniforms. But even this plan unraveled. The members of the Nazi Party showed up in their uniforms anyway, which prompted authorities to deny them entry. A standoff followed, escalating into full chaos. A train nearly plowed through the funeral procession, a brawl ensued, and in all of the confusion, the Nazi Party stole Rockwell's body and cremated it the next day. As for Patler, the man who once claimed that Rockwell was the future, found that his future was the inside of a prison cell. Despite prosecutors pushing for the death penalty, the jury sentenced him to 20 years in prison, which is the lightest sentence for first-degree murder. He served 8 years behind bars before being paroled, and then he violated that parole and served another 6 years. Now a free man, he disavows his past, insists on his innocence, and tries to distance himself from those ideologies that once consumed his life. Without Rockwell, the party crumbled. No one could command the same presence as Rockwell, and without its leader, the party fractured, fading away into irrelevance. Almost 60 years later, Rockwell is nothing more than a footnote in history. a man who spent his life thriving for recognition, but in the end was left with nothing. And this is how Rockwell's story comes to a close. But I still owe you a recreation of the shot and a thorough assessment of how good of a shot John Patler really was. For that, let's go to the range.
Hello guys! Today, we're going to recreate the shooting of George Rockwell by John Patsalos. So as we just heard, John Patsalos waited in his car as George Rockwell was in the laundromat. As George Rockwell left, John Patsalos took the opportunity and shot at George Rockwell. Now, amazingly, he did 2 shots through the windshield. I'm not going to shoot through my windshield today, but we're going to give him extra points for that I'm not going to recreate here. But he also put one in his heart and one in his head, which is phenomenal shooting. So let's see how hard it is to recreate without the windshield. Before we get to the recreation though, let's do a little warm-up shots. John Patsalos used a Mauser. I don't have a Mauser. So we're going to use my East German Makarov. I think that's a pretty good representation. Also a semi-auto pistol. Let's do some warm-up shots. Now, of course, John Patsalos would have been laying low, so let's lay low too. All right, I've got 2 bullets loaded up. Let's give it a try. Let's take a look. So we had a couple bullets in here before, but I believe it was this one and this one that were the new shots. So pretty close to the heart here and pretty close to the head there. Of course, I wasn't shooting through a windshield, which has a high chance of deflecting the bullet and changing where your point of aim versus point of impact is. So not an easy shot, even not through a windshield, but let's give it another try and see how we do next. 2 more. Let's take a peek again. All right, so this time I hit down here on the right side of his chest and then up here by his ear. So still not awful from 15 feet in the car. I probably should be doing better. So let's give it one more time to get 3 attempts. Third time's a charm. That felt good. That's the one. We got one right there, probably right in the heart, and then we got one right there, right in the mouth. So that was a very good representation of John's shot on George Rockwell. Just once again, without the windshield, we don't got the budget for that right now. Okay, so that was a lot of fun. That was one of the first times I've ever shot from my car. We see that John Patsalos was a phenomenal marksman. Through the windshield, one in the heart, one in the face. I had semi-good accuracy, not through a windshield, so based on all that information, as well as the fact that George Rockwell was likely walking during this and I had a nice stationary target, we're going to give John Patsalos the first S of Season 2.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you learned something about George Rockwell and John Patsalos, and I also hope you enjoyed watching the recreation of this shot out at the range. Please leave a like and leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to check out the other episodes, and I'll see you in the next episode of Ranking Every Assassin's Marksmanship. Do Svidaniya.